Ever driven over a bridge and felt that little shiver, when you realize just how high up you are?
Yeah, I think we've all been there.
Or maybe you're like me and you can't help but stare at those massive cables, wondering how on earth they hold everything together.
It's easy to forget someone actually has to make sure those bridges are safe.
Exactly. That's what we're diving into today. Bridge inspectors. We've got a bunch of roll catcher info from a listener, and let me tell you, it's way more interesting than I expected.
Oh, it's definitely not just hard hats and clipboards.
So if you're thinking this might be your dream job, this deep dive is for you. Let's start with the basics. What's the main thing a bridge inspector's actually doing out there?
Their core responsibility is making sure bridges are safe, and they stay that way for a long time. It's about catching problems early on.
Makes sense. But what are they actually looking for? Is it just like looking for cracks?
Well, finding cracks is important, but it's way more than that. They have to examine every inch of the bridge, looking for any signs of wear and tear. The report actually uses the phrase meticulous examination, which I think really captures it.
Meticulous, so like super detail oriented.
Absolutely. They're looking for things like joint breaks, rust, corrosion, anything that could compromise the structure.
Wow, so they're like bridge doctors, diagnosing potential problems before they become serious.
Exactly. And just like a doctor, they need to understand how everything works together. They don't just identify problems, they figure out how to fix them.
So it's problem solving on a massive scale.
Exactly. They work with engineers, contractors, even government officials to make sure repairs and maintenance happen.
I bet that's a whole other challenge, all the communication involved.
Definitely. We'll get into that more later.
Okay. Now, the RoleCatcher report also talks about the work environment, and I'm picturing amazing views, fresh air, maybe a cool breeze.
Yeah, the scenery can be pretty spectacular, that's for sure.
But let's be real, it's not always sunshine and rainbows.
We got it. Bridge inspection is definitely not a desk job.
So what are some of the less glamorous aspects of the job? What's it really like out there?
Well, the report puts it pretty bluntly. Bridge inspectors work in all kinds of weather. Rain, snow, scorching heat, you name it, they've probably experienced it.
Oh, wow, I hadn't thought about that. It's not just the pretty views then.
And it's not just the weather. Remember those heights we were talking about? Imagine dangling hundreds of feet in the air, clinging to the side of a bridge.
Okay, yeah, suddenly the office doesn't seem so bad. Heights aren't my thing.
And it's not just the heights. You've got confined spaces, heavy machinery. Sometimes you're dealing with hazardous materials. It takes a certain kind of person to handle all that.
It's definitely not for the faint of heart. The RoleCatcher report also emphasized the importance of communication for bridge inspectors. Why is that so crucial in this line of work?
Well, you have to remember, they're not working in isolation. Bridge inspectors are constantly interacting with other professionals, engineers, contractors, government officials. They have to be able to explain their findings clearly, sometimes to people who don't have a technical background.
So it's not just about knowing the technical stuff, it's about being able to communicate it effectively.
That's exactly right. A bridge inspector might be the most knowledgeable person on site, but it doesn't mean much if they can't get their point across.
That makes a lot of sense. So we've talked about some of the challenges, but let's move on to how someone actually becomes a bridge inspector. The RoleCatcher report had a section on how can one gain experience, and I was surprised by what they emphasized.
It turns out hands-on experience is super important in this field, like even more than I would have thought.
Really? They emphasized that in the report.
Yeah, they recommend things like entry-level jobs, even volunteering on bridge projects, anything to get real-world exposure.
So it's not enough to just ace your engineering exams.
Well, a solid education is definitely important, but the report really hammers home the point that there's no substitute for actually getting out there and seeing how things work in practice.
That makes sense. It's one thing to read about bridge construction in a textbook, it's another to see it firsthand.
Exactly, and that's where those entry-level positions and volunteer opportunities come in. They give you a chance to learn from experienced inspectors, get comfortable with the tools and techniques, and really understand the day-to-day realities of the job.
So what kind of core abilities are we talking about here? The report had a whole section on that, and it seemed like this job requires a pretty unique combination of skills.
Oh, absolutely. You need to be physically fit. For one thing, all that climbing, bending, lifting, it's a physically demanding job.
Yeah.
But it's also mentally demanding.
So it's not just about brawn, it's about brains too.
Big time. The report actually puts reading comprehension as a core ability, like 61% emphasis.
61%. Wow, that's a lot. Why so high?
Think about it. Bridge inspectors have to read and understand all sorts of technical documents, blueprints, Engineering reports, safety regulations, they need to be able to interpret data, analyze trends, and make critical decisions based on their findings.
So it's like being a detective, but instead of clues, you're looking for structural weaknesses.
Exactly. And you have to be able to communicate those findings to others, often in high-pressure situations.
That communication piece seems to be a recurring theme.
It's essential. A bridge inspector might be the most brilliant engineer in the world, but if they can't clearly explain a problem or a solution, it's not going to do much good.
Right. It's about getting everyone on the same page, from the engineers to the contractors to the people making decisions about repairs.
Precisely. Clear, concise, and accurate communication is absolutely crucial in this line of work.
Got it. So we've covered physical stamina, analytical skills, communication. What about formal education? Are there any specific degrees that are particularly relevant to becoming a bridge inspector?
The report mentions civil engineering and structural engineering as the most common academic pathways. Makes sense, right?
Absolutely. Those seem like obvious choices. Anything else?
Yeah, they also mention construction management and even geotechnical engineering. It's a pretty diverse field, actually, in terms of educational backgrounds.
Geotechnical engineering. What's that all about?
It's basically a specialized branch of civil engineering that focuses on soil and rock mechanics.
So understanding what's going on beneath the surface.
Exactly, which is obviously crucial when you're talking about the stability of a bridge.
Makes sense. The report also mentioned that bridge inspection is a field where continuous learning is really important. Why is that? Is it because the technology is constantly evolving?
That's a big part of it. Think about all the new materials and construction techniques being used these days, and then you've got drones and sensors and all sorts of high-tech equipment being used for inspections.
Speaking of drones, that seems like a total game changer for this field.
It really is. Drones allow inspectors to access those hard-to-reach areas that would have been incredibly difficult and dangerous to inspect before. Plus, the cameras and sensors on these drones can capture data with a level of detail that was unimaginable just a few years ago.
So not only are drones making the job safer, they're also making it more efficient and providing more accurate information.
Exactly. And that means inspectors need to stay up to date on the latest drone technology, data analysis techniques, and so on. It's a constantly evolving field.
It sounds like it. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. The challenges, the skills, the education. But what about the day-to-day reality of the job? The RoleCatcher report gave us a glimpse of that in its profile of an entry-level bridge inspector. What can you tell us about that?
Okay, so imagine this. You're a brand new bridge inspector, fresh out of school, or maybe you've got some hands-on experience under your belt. You arrive at the office, coffee in hand, ready to tackle the day. What's the first thing you do?
Check my email. Scroll through social media.
Not quite. You'd probably start by reviewing any previous inspection reports for the bridge you're assigned to that day. You want to familiarize yourself with its history, any past issues, and get a sense of what to expect.
So kind of like a doctor checking a patient's medical history before an exam.
Exactly. You're gathering as much information as possible before you even set foot on the bridge. Then you'd gather your tools, and yes, that might include prepping a drone these days, and head out to the site.
Okay, I'm picturing a hard hat, safety vest, maybe a clipboard, and a tape measure. What else?
Well, depending on the type of inspection, you might have all sorts of specialized equipment. Hammers for checking for delamination, gauges for measuring cracks, maybe even ground-penetrating radar to look for subsurface issues.
Wow, it's way more high-tech than I imagined. So you arrive at the bridge, all geared up and ready to go. What happens next?
It's inspection time. This is where that meticulous examination comes in. You're systematically checking every inch of the bridge, from the foundation to the deck to the supporting structures, looking for any signs of damage, deterioration, or potential hazards.
And you're not just looking, you're also listening, touching, maybe even smelling for clues, right?
Absolutely. You're using all your senses, along with those specialized tools, to get a complete picture of the bridge's condition. You might be tapping on concrete to check for hollow sounds, looking for rust stains or water seepage, or even just feeling for vibrations that might indicate a problem.
It sounds like a very hands-on, detail-oriented process. What happens after the inspection itself is complete? Do you just pack up and head home?
Not so fast. The inspection might be over, but the work isn't done yet. Now comes the analysis and reporting phase. You'll head back to the office and start going through all the data you collected. Notes, measurements, photos, drone footage.
So it's back to the computer, I guess.
In a way, yes. But it's not just data entry. You're analyzing that data, comparing it to previous reports, looking for trends, and trying to connect the dots. You might need to consult with senior engineers, especially if you've discovered something concerning.
So there's a lot of collaboration involved, even after the field work is done.
Definitely. Bridge inspection is a team effort. And the final step in that process is writing up a detailed report that summarizes your findings, outlines any recommended actions, and might even include cost estimates for repairs.
That report sounds like a pretty important document.
It is. It's the official record of the bridge's condition, and it's what informs any decisions about future maintenance or repairs. So it's got to be accurate, thorough, and easy to understand, even for people who aren't bridge experts.
High stakes. Speaking of high stakes, what happens if a bridge inspector uncovers a serious problem during an inspection? Are they empowered to make decisions about what happens next?
That's where things can get really interesting. It depends on the severity of the problem.
Okay, so let's say it's something serious. What kind of decisions might a bridge inspector be involved in?
Well, they might recommend immediate repairs if it's urgent. Or they might suggest closing off lanes of traffic to reduce the load on the bridge.
And in some cases, they might even recommend closing the whole bridge.
Exactly. It's a judgment call, balancing the urgency of the situation with public safety. It's a big responsibility.
No kidding. Sounds like a job where you really feel like you're making a difference. But let's shift gears a bit and talk about career progression. The RoleCatcher report also talked about advancement paths for bridge inspectors. What are some of the options for someone who wants to move up in this field?
Well, as you gain experience, you can move into more senior inspection roles, supervising teams, managing larger projects, that kind of thing.
So there's a management track within bridge inspection.
Definitely. And you can also specialize in a particular type of bridge or inspection technique.
So you could become the expert on suspension bridges, for example.
Exactly. Or the go-to person for underwater inspections. There are lots of possibilities.
Cool. The report also mentioned that getting certified can open doors to new opportunities. What's that all about?
Yeah, certifications are a big deal in this field. They're a way to demonstrate your expertise and commitment to professional development. The Certified Bridge Inspector Credential, or CBI, is one of the most recognized ones.
So it's like a stamp of approval from the bridge inspection gods.
Pretty much. Having those letters after your name shows potential employers that you're serious about your career and that you've got the skills to back it up.
Makes sense. It's like getting a black belt in bridge inspection.
Hmm.
So to wrap things up, what would you say are the key takeaways for our listener who's considering a career as bridge inspector?
Well, first off, it's a job with a lot of responsibility, but also a lot of rewards. You're playing a vital role in ensuring public safety, and that's pretty amazing.
Absolutely. And it's not your typical 9-to-5 desk job. You're out there in the elements using your hands, your head, and some pretty cool technology.
And it's a field that's constantly evolving, which keeps things interesting. New technologies, new materials, new challenges. You'll never be bored.
Sounds like a career with a bright future. Well, on that note, I think we've covered the span of bridge inspection pretty thoroughly today.
I think so.
It's been fascinating to dive deep into this often overlooked profession. To our listener, we hope this deep dive has given you a new perspective on what it takes to keep those bridges standing strong.
And who knows, maybe we've inspired the next generation of bridge inspectors.
You never know. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and most importantly, stay curious.